In times like these, we need faith that's victorious, and you can walk in it. Welcome to Victorious Faith with Pastor Mark Cowart.
Hello and welcome to the Victorious Faith broadcast. Good to be with you again today, and I'm joined once again with our dear friend, Dr. Cathy Tolleson. Dr. Cathy, it's good to have you with us. We're going to pick up somewhat where we left off, and today we're going to really get into some powerful things. One of the things, the book that we're offering for sale is called Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You. It's actually several authors, and this book we talked about yesterday from the standpoint, I love the way it breaks down trauma. Trauma A, trauma B. All of life's traumas can be put in those two categories. We're actually going to talk today about how to process that. So this is going to be very important. One of the things I want to make aware that we have for a free offer, our study notes that you can download instantly. And I've got on those study notes trauma A and trauma B. It's real simple because you'll probably want to share that with people. But as we get started today, Dr. Cathy, as a pastor, and we've talked about this before, emotions get a bad rap and people hate them, but God gave them to us. Our life would not be what God intended it without emotions. One of the things we've talked about previously is that there are primary emotions, basic emotions, but they're crucial for survival.
Absolutely.
They're innate and universal. Doesn't matter what nation, tribe, or tongue you're from, we all share this common emotional functionality, and also it's hardwired in our brains. And we here at Church for All Nations, we have that thing that we've talked about, Core Values Index, called the CVI, where people learn how they're hardwired, because if you don't understand how you're hardwired, you can very easily slip into what we call going dark, the worst version of yourself. But then there is the best version of yourself. One of the things we talked about that we would like to cover today, okay, so what if we can identify trauma A, trauma B? Okay, so I understand. I've got both of them. How do you process trauma so that a person can return to emotional health, which will result in spiritual well-being?
Right. I'll cover trauma A quickly, and then we'll talk more about trauma B. But trauma A, a lot of times it's the light bulb, the insight, like, oh, I didn't get that. Oh, I didn't have that. And begin to, receive those things from therapeutic relationships.
Can we do this also? Just when you were talking, just to review, type A trauma is not being cherished and celebrated, not having the experience of being a delight. Not so much, because think about it, when a child comes home from the hospital, what does that child have to offer? Dirty diapers, crying at the craziest times, wanting food, and 100% dependency upon the caretaker. So, people came into this world and parents felt like and of course we just heard someone share how that one of their parents said, I regret we even had you. That would be a type A trauma. Not receiving large amounts of non-sexual physical nurturing, not having a parent take the time to understand who you are. So those are some of the type A traumas. It's what's absent in a person's life.
Right, and also then beginning to teach them how to look to the Lord in their relationship, because, the Word says that when our father and mother forsake us, He will never leave us. And sometimes we kind of look at if we were abandoned or orphaned or whatever, He won't leave us. But I believe any area, no matter how big or how small, of where we did not receive what we needed to get, the Lord is going to provide that. Now, sometimes He does it directly, and sometimes He does it through people. Like, I've had some really good spiritual fathers that were able to give me some things my dad wasn't able to give me. And that makes a difference. That's why relationships in our church, the one thing I love about Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You is it ultimately takes us to identifying our own wounding, our own need for healing, and then how do you begin to establish, how do you connect to a healing culture, and how do you begin to establish healing cultures in your churches or other organizations, but especially churches. We should be a healing culture. I like what you said, that sometimes the worst hurts are our church hurts. And how do we be able to establish that? And living from the heart Jesus gave you is also important for people who are wounded, because sometimes they keep connecting to cultures that are rewounding them and not able to find those healing relationships, whether it's a counselor, minister, church, home group, whatever it is, that can begin to provide us with those things that really are important in healing that type A
You said
trauma.
something so powerful recently. Talk about what the parent of the opposite sex in a marriage for the child, what they are meant by God and designed by God to do.
So, and again, we don't get legalistic with this, but the basic core, I can look at a person's life and know sometimes the degrees of healing that they're going to need, because every child needs impartation from the same-sex parent, but they need validation, a stamping from the opposite sex parent. It's a very foundational thing. Now, I got a lot imparted from my dad, but it didn't help me with the validation that he should have given me, okay? And so the opposite, so let's say you have a son, you're going to impart to your son. The wife is going to, the mother is going to be validating. Yes, you are wonderful. Look at what you did. You're amazing. You're good looking. You're this, you're that. And they're validating the impartation. So here's what it ends up. If you end up and you had a parent that imparted, but you did not get validation, you're going to have insecurity. If you had a parent that did not impart, but let's say you're a young man, dad was just too busy, never imparted, but mom was validating, they always feel kind of like a fraud. People think I've got the stuff, but I don't have the stuff. The other part is I feel like I have this stuff, but I'm insecure with the stuff because I didn't get that validation.
So powerful. So here's the deal. I don't think there's a person listening, because you've said people that come from great Christian homes, good and godly parents, actually, and this reminds me, I used to have a staff member. His wife was an occupational therapist. I remember this shocked me. She said that, she helped people that had been in car wrecks and had trauma and had to work that out of their system. Well, they're spiritually and emotionally but she said you could be in a fender bender in a car, like a car's going 5 miles an hour, runs into the car in front of it, and a 5 mile per hour impact is enough to impose trauma. And I was shocked. I thought, no way. And sometimes even when that happens, you really don't find it out till later. So you're saying that even in good Christian homes, godly Christian homes, with Christian foundations, you can have this kind of a trauma.
Oh, absolutely. I see it all the time. And a lot of times they're, again, the parents just aren't taught, they're not aware. And on my website, I've got a whole module on raising kingdom kids, and share more on this, because I know the other thing is sometimes you've not got validation, but sometimes you've been invalidated. Okay, so a daughter with a father who not only didn't validate her, but invalidate her, and then if I have someone that was never imparted to, never validated, and they were invalidated, we're in the basement. If maybe they never had impartation or validation, you're kind of like barely ground floor. And then you can work, yes, I had impartation, but I didn't get validation. I know the issues that come out of that. Yes, I got validation, but no impartation. I understand what comes from that.
You just made me think of something, Dr. Cathy. In your office, I remember Linda and I were there one time, and I looked on the wall and I saw one of your certificates, and it was you had been certified in critical incident stress management. And I'm like, I asked you, what is that? And you talked about your training in that and what it did, because when 9/11 happened, a lot of things most people don't realize. Like there were people in those towers that were about to burn to death, and rather than burn to death, they jumped out of the windows. Well, the people down below said it sounded like 12-gauge shotguns going off. Can you imagine?
And people seeing that, yes.
People seeing that and probably being splattered by the blood and remains of these people. That's a trauma.
Yes.
But tell us what critical incident stress management is, and we can go into the processing of trauma.
Right, because the type B trauma takes a different processing, because we have to start off by understanding how God designed us. And we can see this now with brain scans, because you can have someone who has a traumatic memory, or what we call implicit. It is stored in one part of the brain. When it is moved, and I'll share how we do that, it actually moves to another part of our brain. And when you talk about it from that part of the brain, it's coming from a different place. So traumatic memory is called implicit memory, and we have to process it to go to what we call narrative or explicit memory. And so that traumatic incident, and this is what critical incident stress management teaches us and was used. There were Christian teams, secular teams, all went to New York. And it was after 9/11, I felt like I needed to get ready, have more of this training, and I began to understand even more how trauma affects our physical being. And trauma memory is connected to our limbic system. Okay, our limbic system is where we get fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Okay, fight is our anger issues. You know, when we're over the top, road rage is a fight limbic response. Flight is, you know, that's where we get, I'm leaving, I'm not staying here, there's a conflict, I go shopping, whatever, you know.
But some of that is healthy, right? You're in the woods, there's a bear that's
absolutely
coming at you. I hope you got the flight kicking in there,
right? Our limbic is our survival mechanism.
So that's where it's necessary for survival.
And
then.
sometimes flight, like, a lion is a fight animal. A horse is a flight animal. A deer, we say deer in headlights. What do? They're a freeze animal. And all of those things protect them. And then there's the last one is called fawn, which is just trying to
fawn as in?
A little, but more as fawning over someone, just being nice. That's where you get the Stockholm syndrome. Is I start fawning with my captor. They begin to identify, but they're also very appeasing, very sweet, very, you're being mean and controlling, and I'm just going to be sweeter. And sometimes that's not good, because sometimes you need to set boundaries and you need to confront things. And so that is an automatic response, and it is for our survival. We don't want to be without it. But if it's being used by our trauma brain at inappropriate times, then it causes all kinds of problems.
Let me bring this back around, because really this is very simple, but it's a complex operation. Like I've used this analogy. So when I go overseas, for instance, I think it's interesting. All I have to do is get my ticket and get on this airplane. And then we go up 36,000 feet, 80 degrees below zero. And if that thing didn't have pressurization, we'd all, blood would boil. But I'm in there enjoying the ride. But underneath the skin of that airplane is all these complex operations.
Exactly.
So really what we're talking about, this is really simple. It's complex in nature, but it's very simple in operation. We've got to have these emotions. We've got to have all these things. But either side of the spectrum, if they're out of balance, then they can start to destroy us.
Well, our prefrontal cortex, which we have, which animals don't, is that management system. But some people, like I always say, you can't counsel a limbic marriage. You have to get their prefrontal cortexes functioning, because they say things they don't mean. One's fighting, one's flighting. It's all over the place. But when we're designed as human beings, and I believe in the image of God, where we have the ability not just to react, but to respond, to be able to stop and think, if I say that, that's going to have long-term ramifications, so I'm not going to say that. Limbic doesn't have that stop button. It is all impulse, it's all survival. You don't have time to think if you've got someone chasing you. and you know they're wanting to do you harm. But that prefrontal cortex is what helps us. But traumatic memory is wired to the limbic system. And so that's where, it's like we talk about a vet coming home from war and they hear a loud noise and, they're under the table or grabbing their kids. And that's a lot of times our vets are coming home and they've had to be in that limbic place a lot. And so they are on high alert all the time. They're looking all the time. They don't just casually go in a restaurant and sit down. They have to make sure they're in a booth and they're sitting. They can see the door. They scan everybody in there. They've already looked. What's their escape route? They're on high alert all the time. And there has to be a resetting of that limbic system. But it really, again, is not complicated. I'm just helping give some basic understanding. But when you actually process, like critical incident stress management teams go in and they get like maybe 5 people, 6 people. Individually, I do a lot of this in my counseling practice, but individually you're just able to target traumatic memories, and you have to talk that memory out in detailed form, and it moves to narrative memory in our brain, which is a beautiful place for that memory to be. Because when it's in narrative memory, you know it still happened to you, but you have distance. It's not being able to be hijacked by the limbic system. You don't have triggers. You don't have panic attacks. I give an example of some time of, let's say a woman, she's gone shopping with her girlfriends, they're excited, get to the department store, in the elevator, and she doesn't even realize, but subliminally, she's hearing instrumental, the song that was playing the summer she was raped when she was 16. And all of a sudden, she starts feeling anxious. She wants to go home. She doesn't know why. She's having a panic attack, and she's got to make some excuse to get out of there. And she doesn't even know that that's what caused it, okay? I'm not saying every panic attack is from that, but a lot of it is that secondary conditioning that causes, sometimes it can be color, it can be smell. I mean, I've had people who've been sexually abused in basements, and if anything smells musty or, anything like that, they're triggered.
So the key word right there is triggers.
Yes.
Or buttons. And then basically it does an override. When you talk about the prefrontal cortex, basically what you're saying is we need to think.
Yes.
And think with the mind of Christ,
right.
which
and
is Romans 12:2.
The limbic system does not think. It just reacts. But the prefrontal cortex, the other thing is a lot of us have had damage done to it because of alcohol abuse at a young age, addiction. It shuts down the development. If you look at brain scans of it, there's big dark holes in the prefrontal cortex, and that needs time off of alcohol, off of addiction for that to begin to develop. That's why most treatment really needs a good year and a half. 30 days you can detox, but you don't heal a brain that quick. And we need that part of the brain to be healed and developed. Now, I'm not saying God can't do a miracle, but a lot of this, sometimes He requires a progression for our healing. And so we need to, again, get that activated. But when we put that memory into that story, it moves it into narrative memory. And like I said, the limbic system doesn't it can access. I shared in my own life, before I was born again, young, after divorce, I had a man who stalked me, and for about a year and a half. And it was before the stalking laws in Florida. And also he threatened if I ever went to the police, he was going to kill my parents, my brother. I've had knives to my throat. I've been, had him shooting at me and my girls and throwing them under the table, and just a lot of different things. So I could, if I heard a sound of a loud truck, I could feel anxious, couldn't breathe, want to get away. If I saw someone sort of familiar or whatever. He also had a friend who owned a construction company where they did curbing and things on the highway. And there were times I wouldn't realize it, but we would go by a construction site and I would feel anxious, irritable, just wanted to get out of there, be angry. Why are they always working on these roads, And once I really processed that trauma, none of that bothers me.
So what you're saying, there is hope no matter what level of trauma people have had.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, I've worked with some of the deepest of deep traumas. And yet I've seen and again, we're body, soul, and spirit. We don't want to leave out the body. And as Christians, a lot of times, I always say we don't have to be medieval to be a Christian. If we've got science showing us something, God created it. He designed it. He designed how we operate and function. Let's work with what he designed. And, we can't, I've had people who come to me and say, I told somebody, that I was sexually abused. I told them that my grandfather raped me, but it still bothers me. I still have anxiety. I still have this. And when I find out, when we talk about it, I said, did you ever talk it out in detailed form? Most of the times, no. And a lot of times people don't want to go there because sometimes it's shameful, it's painful. They don't want to go back and revisit trauma. But every person, I've had people they've sat on my couch and say, look, yes, I had stuff happen to me, but I'm not going back there. If you can help me without me going back there, okay. And I've explained how the brain works, and it usually doesn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes, and all of a sudden they're sitting up on the edge of their seat saying, I'm ready, I want to do that. And the next minute we are processing that traumatic memory. And it's about getting the details. So let me just share this. Critical incident stress management, like I was just in Ukraine, I told you, and
a lot of trauma with the war.
Lots of trauma with the war. And trained teams on how to process. And again, these weren't counselors or therapists. These were people driving in and bringing supplies in and helping with refugees and all of that sort of thing. But critical incident stress management, if I had 5 people that had been in New York during 9/11, I would sit down with them and we'd introduce each other, and then I would say, okay, tell me what happened that day. What did you experience? They would each tell me. Then I would say, what were you thinking when that was happening? They would each tell me. What were you feeling when that was happening? They would each tell me. What have you been experiencing since that happened? Talking about their symptoms and different things. You help normalize their symptoms, like, it's normal sometimes not to be able to sleep or have dreams or have flashes, but what we're doing today is going to really help you process that, and then just encourage them in some things. And that alone, statistically, they have followed these people, cuts down the need for long-term counseling by 80 to 85%. And they say most of those people who needed long-term counseling needed it before the incident anyhow. And so it helps, and a lot of times we want to avoid it. We don't want to make someone talk about it. We don't want to tell the details of it. But when they can go in, like I will, when I'm working one-on-one with that abuse victim, I will say, okay, I want you to tell me, like, again, this is never going to happen, but if I had to make a movie of it, I want you to give me enough detail that I could recreate that. Like, tell me what the room looked like, tell me what you were wearing. Do you know what time of year it was? Do you remember any smells? Do you remember what was said, what you said? Tell me what you felt, tell me what you were thinking, tell me what you did afterward. And we process that memory. And it is amazing, the results. And not only do we do it with our brain, then we ask Jesus to come into that memory and speak to that heart to really heal that. He is the healer. I'm not a healer. He is the healer.
You're a facilitator.
I'm a facilitator, but he can come in to that memory, and he has done some of the most loving, kindest, spoke the most amazing things to people. A lot of this is confidential things, but I mean, would just bring tears to my eyes, because I would think, God, how are you going to heal this? How can you touch this? This is so horrific.
Yeah.
But yet every time he came in and did the perfect thing.
And I want to encourage everybody to get and purchase this book for your library, Living from the Heart of Jesus, because really a lot of what you're talking about, it will give hope to, and I'm like you, Dr. Cathy, I have sat with people that have had encounters like you're talking about, and I was unable to hold tears back because the presence of God was so strong. And I like to think of it this way. I ask people, when we get to heaven, do you think there'll be any pain left in your heart? No. Well, the Lord said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven.
Amen.
So you don't have to wait till you get to heaven for healing, spirit, soul, or body, all the emotions and what you're talking about. And another thing, I've got some combat vets here and stories that will just boggle your mind, and you just wonder how you want to give them an award for just being sane and still alive, but you don't have to go overseas to have PTSD.
Oh, no.
It's post-trauma stress disorder. And what I really have taken out of our conversation today, this is something you may not want to happen, you want to be over, but it's the way we're hardwired. And if you don't understand that, and there's a very simple way to process it out.
And it's why we had so many vets so dysfunctional from World War II, Vietnam War, is because they didn't understand this and they never told anybody. And the military wasn't happening. They didn't fully understand that. The thing is, it's best not to talk about it. And a lot of times in church too, I know I work with trained counselors a lot of times, and it's very hard for them sometimes to lead someone back to that painful place and require them, even in being able to use the sexual words, if it's been sexual abuse or whatever, to be able to speak those words and help them do that. Well, he touched me. Okay, no, where did he touch you? How did he touch you?
We're out of time, but I want to say it's like going to the doctor.
Yeah.
And I've cut myself as a meat cutter, and boy, they had to scrub out those wounds.
Ooh, yeah.
And I hated it. And I go, this guy's getting paid to do this to me. But the healing could then begin.
Yes.
And so, listen, we're out of time. These are the fastest half hours that I've had, but I want to encourage you, get this book, purchase it. Living from the Heart Jesus Gave You. I promise you, don't loan it out. Buy 2 copies and then you can give one away. This will really cause light to come on so many areas of your life. We also have these programs that we're doing today because maybe you hear something you want to share with someone. They're available for purchase, and then our free offer is a download of the show notes here, and we encourage you to take advantage of that free offer. You're going to want to be with us the rest of the week here with Dr. Cathy Tolleson. Tell us your website real quick.
It's schoolofpropheticcounseling.com.
Go to that website, because if you're hearing stuff, you have so much material that will expand on that. And I encourage you to visit Dr. Cathy's website, and it'll equip you to minister to yourself and to others. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow at this same time. Till then, may the Lord's richest blessings be yours.
Order this teaching today at markcowart.org or by calling 1-800-590-4764.
Thank you for watching the Victorious Faith broadcast. I want to invite you, if you're in the Colorado Springs area, would you join us for a Sunday service at Church for All Nations? We have an incredible children's ministry. We know that God wants to know children at a very young age, and that they can know Him and know His Holy Spirit. And so we have invested so much into our children's ministry. So we want to invite you to one of our services at 9 or 11 a.m. You can also be a part of services online, and you can check out all of our kids' ministry episodes on the CFAN app.